Hello and welcome to the first of our EMEA broadcasts for Couchbase, or Hangouts, as I should say. So today we're going to be looking at the new 2.0 SDKs for Couchbase. Primarily, we're going to be looking at those on the JVM and also NodeJS. So before we get started, let's have a look at who we are. I'm Matthew Revell. I work as a developer advocate in the UK for Couchbase, and with me I've also got Fehre, who is based in London. And Phil, introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. I'm Phil. I'm actually based in London, like Matthew is, kind of. Recently moved here and now working as a developer advocate and greatly interested in everything Node.js. That's why I'm gonna do something with Node today. Hey.
That's because you're a booster. And also we've got Michael Nitschinger over in Austria. Hi, Michael.
Yes, hi. So my name is Michael Nitschinger. For those who don't know me, I'm based in Vienna, so not in London, quite a little bit away. I'm working as a software engineer on the SDK engineering team at Couchbase, and that's why I'll demo some of the new JVM SDK 2.0 stuff today at this Hangout.
Cool. So if you're European or maybe even Australian, you might have seen the Eurovision Song Contest. And this, to me, is a little bit like when they give the votes. We've got Michael over in Vienna who will give him 0 point to whoever he doesn't like it.
You give me 12 points, but I don't even have a beard.
Okay, if you get no beard, then it's 0 points for you. Sorry.
Yeah. So anyway, enough of the Eurovision fan-specific content. So let's talk about how this is going to work. So it's going to be kind of a bit like a presentation, a bit like a live coding session, but also, most importantly, it's a bit like a Q&A session. So if you're watching this and you've got some burning questions about Couchbase, then be sure to ask us. Now, there are a couple of ways that you can ask us. One is we've got the Q&A app, which isn't working right now, but it might work at some point if I can get that working. And also, you can email me your questions. So you can email Matthew with 2 T's at couchbase.com. That's Matthew@couchbase.com. And if not, I'll try and get the Q&A app working during Michael's presentation. So ask me questions if you've got any, and we'll answer them at the end. So Michael, I'm going to hand over to you about the Java and JVM 2.0 SDKs.
Thank you, Matthew. So let me share my screen here because I have a few slides, just a few to give you a quick introduction, and then we'll jump right into some code. So let's share my screen here. Can you see my screen? Does that work?
Perfect. Yes.
Yep, that's good.
Perfect. Okay. So you may have heard that we are currently reworking or redesigning our SDKs. So, and we are referring to them as the 2.0 SDKs, just as a new major version, because we really want to move to a different API, which also means that we are to some degree breaking also API. So why are we doing this? Why are we even considering moving to something new? So the main idea is that Couchbase over the years has evolved to a full-blown document-oriented database. If you look back way in the past, it was more like a key value store, and we also need that, or we want that our API reflects the shift from a key value store to a full-blown document-oriented database. And because of new things ahead, like the Nickel query language and the View engine, which has been there for quite a while, it was just time to rethink how we are approaching our APIs. Now, where we are going with this is that we want to give you a more intuitive workflow on how you work with buckets and the cluster. Now, if you are familiar with our current SDK, what you do in most of the languages is that you open a Couchbase client and you give it the bucket name and the seed nodes of the cluster, and you're talking to one bucket. Now, while this is okay, one thing that we can improve, and what we are doing with the new SDKs, is that we are going to a flow where you are connecting to a cluster, and then you are opening and closing buckets along the way. This not only more closely resembles what you are doing in the user interface and how the server works, but also it allows us in the SDKs from an architectural perspective to get better resource management and component utilization. Because you can think that, for example, for the Vue engine, which uses HTTP underneath, we can reuse sockets for multiple buckets. And because the Vue engine only distinguishes between what URI is used internally and what authentication is used for a request. So, for example, we can share sockets and other resources between buckets, which makes it more resource efficient. And also, it makes more naturally if we want to distinguish between cluster-wide and bucket-level operations. Now, for example, loading a document, storing a document, flushing the bucket, this all happens at the bucket level. But what we are also looking at is providing more cluster-level operations. We are still working on the details, but doing things like creating a bucket, deleting a bucket, or even adding a node, removing a node, initiating rebellants. All this doesn't make sense at the bucket level, but rather at the cluster level. And with our workflow that we've implemented in the 2.0 SDKs, we can naturally implement those, and it just feels very naturally and easily to work with this in this flow. So the next thing with the 2.0 SDKs, which is very important for us, is data management. And it's all about documents. We now have JSON as a really first-class citizen inside our database. And it's also time to give users a more easier way to work with those documents, and especially JSON documents. So, for example, with the Java SDK, we are now using a document abstraction, which not only contains the value, but also other types like expiration time, the actual content, the KS value, the document ID, and so forth, which also adds to very natural data flow, as we'll see a little later in the demos. Mutating data, if you've used our SDK before, you may come across set, add, and replace. This has been renamed to upset, insert, and replace to more closely reflect what people are expecting from a document-oriented database, especially if they're coming from the relational world, and delete was kept the same. If you want to retrieve data, there are three ways. The first one is the get method, where you can look up your documents by its unique ID. And then we have query methods for both Vue queries and also brand new for Nickel queries, for our brand new SQL-like query language for JSON documents. And in addition, as I mentioned before, cluster-level functionality will also be present. And what's also important to point out is that nothing is left behind. So everything that you can find in the old SDKs will also be present in one way or another in the new SDKs. So looking at implementations very quickly, for .NET, the 2.0 developer preview 2 has been released. Check out our blog for more details on how to use it, what's already in there, and so forth. And it provides you with, and so here's an example on how to do common operations with .NET SDK. So you can already spot the insert method, and instead of using an add method, if I go back here, you can see that I'm initializing the cluster object, not going directly to the bucket, then using open bucket to get my bucket reference. For PHP, here it says DP1 and the link goes to DP2. So this is obviously a bug in the slide. So DP2 has been released only a few days ago. So if you're a PHP developer, also check out our blog for the latest and greatest on the 2.0 SDKs. Now, Java, also DP2 has been released 2 days ago. And it's a complete rewrite to the current 1.4 client. It has different dependencies, and the main thing that distinguishes it is that it's split up into a core library and language bindings on top. Now, why do we do this? The idea is that we not only want to provide first-class support for Java but also honor the fact that there are more and more languages coming up on the JVM, like Scala, Clojure, and JRuby. Now, how could this look like from an like 100 feet perspective? You can think of the Couchbase JVM core, or core IO package as we call it, at the very bottom, which handles rebalance, which is a message-oriented library. And on top of this core package, we provide our language bindings like Java, Scala, Groovy, and so forth. And on top of the language bindings, then you can have further integration like with Spring, Spring Data, the Plane framework for Scala, or Rails integration for JRuby, or even if you have very specialized requirements like writing a custom high-performance Hadoop connector, you can talk directly to our JVM core package and get even better performance, because you can also deal directly with raw byte buffers. So the core IO package is completely message-oriented. It's asynchronous and reactive inside, and exposes also RX Java observables to the outside. For this Hangout, we don't have much time to look into RX Java and what it provides, but I would recommend you to check out videos on YouTube from Netflix, especially from Ben Christensen. If you look from him, he has some very great talks about RX Java. And also be on the lookout that in the next few days we're going to release a blog post about the motivation and why we chose RX Java and what benefits it gives us, especially with our new SDK. It's a complete driver, but it doesn't have an API on top of it. It just has one method called send. So on top of our core package, we have the Couchbase Java client binding, and it's an idiomatic Java API on top of the core package. And Java 8 is set here because RX Java, while it's compliant with Java 6 and above, it already supports Java 8, which means if you're in the fortunate position that you already can use Java 8 code in your projects, you can use lambdas and all that stuff very, very nicely with the new Couchbase SDK. It has integrated JSON support, so you don't have to deal with JSON manual anymore, as you have to do with the current SDKs. We will provide compatibility modes with the old SDKs, and we're also planning on advanced ODM capabilities, and also a special separate package which implements the JSR 107, which is the standardized JCache API. So with that, enough slides. Do we have any questions so far, Matthew?
Hey, sorry, it took me a while to unmute. We do have one question from Frank, which is it possible to use the new 2. series SDKs against the same cluster as we're using the 1. series SDKs?
So with the there are minor changes in how we treat the data. In general, the answer is yes. And where the answer is maybe, we are providing specific upgrade paths. So if you're currently, let's say, on Java 1.4 and you are looking to migrate towards 2.0, it will be compatible. So we will provide a transcoder, a document transcoder, which works exactly like the old one. I'm currently working on that. And if you have very special requirements, if you have custom transcoders currently in use, which we also allow on the old SDKs, you will have the same facilities exposed to implement your custom logic as well on top of the new SDK, but with a more idiomatic and sophisticated API.
Great, thanks. Sorry, go ahead, Phil.
Just a quick question. How easy do you think it is to port a custom transcoder from the old to the new SDK in Java?
It's actually pretty straightforward, because normally when you implement the custom transcoder, you're looking at two things. The first one is obviously the value itself, which in the old SDK comes along as a byte array, and in the new one it's a netty byte buffer. So it's basically the same structure, just with more flexibility in how you can interact with it. And the other thing are the flags, and the flags from the Memcache binary protocol, if you're familiar with those, we also expose them on the new one. So it will be, of course, a little bit of work because the API is maybe a little different, but it shouldn't be too much work actually.
Great, thanks. Okay, so Michael.
Yes, I'll jump into
this.
demo. Yes, let me jump into a quick demo. So, okay, so I've got a 3-node Couchbase cluster running here, 251. And let me show you some code here. So maybe I'll just go into presentation mode. So let me get rid of that to explain what's going on. So I'll just get rid of it completely. All right. So with the in the old SDKs, if you're familiar, what you were normally doing is you say Couchbase client new with the seed nodes, the bucket name, doing like client.get and so forth. Now this is a little different now because we are now differentiating between the cluster and the bucket. To blocking is, I can explain it in a second here. Let me just do something first. So
just quickly, when you're opening a connection to a bucket there, is that only a Couchbase style bucket you can open to, or can you also open up to a Memcached style bucket?
Currently in the DP2, I didn't implement Memcached bucket support right now, but once we hit the final one, there will definitely support for a Memcached bucket. And you don't need to distinguish between those manually. You just say like open bucket memcache or however you want to name it, because depending on the config that we get from the server, we distinguish if it's a Couchbase bucket or a memcache bucket. That said, the methods, or not all methods, are likely to be available to you, like fuse and nickel querying, and other things like persist to and replicate to constraints, because they are not supported on memcache buckets. So while you can do your classical memcache operations for memcache buckets, some methods will likely throw an exception saying this operation is not supported on this type of bucket.
All right, thanks.
If you do not provide any params both to the Couchbase cluster and here to the open bucket, it will connect to the default bucket on localhost. So since I have my cluster running on virtual machines, I'll give it a custom IP address, and I can use the default bucket, or I could, let's say, go to the PSN, whatever works. For now, I'll just go with the default bucket. Now, if I don't use to blocking here, what I would get back is an observable of bucket. So what this is, again, I can't go into much detail about how observables work, but you can think of it like an like the asynchronous cousin of the iterable. So in our case, because we only have one result, the bucket instance, it works a little like a future. And the to blocking single, you can think of it as blocking on the future. So when you call to blocking single, our thread blocks and waits until we get the actual bucket. Because this can take some time, we need to open sockets underneath and all that stuff. So now we have our bucket, and now we can do something with it. So upsert, for example, you want to upsert a document, and okay, what is going on there? So upsert with a document. Now, currently we support the JSON document, so you can say JSON document. We give it an ID, user maker, and then we need to give it a content. We could also store the case value, give it an expiration time, and so forth. But we just now want to deal with content. And content for a JSON document is a JSON object. So we can say JSON object content. So we create the JSON object, and then we now this will store it will store the JSON document inside our bucket, And we can either, again, use to blocking here and wait until it's done, or we can use subscribe, which is the normal thing that you are doing with observables. So you are subscribing and putting in an subscriber in there, and your subscriber will be called once the upsert operation here is done. So let's use a subscriber here, and because it's asynchronous, we should also sleep at the end. So we can say thread. Give it 10 seconds or whatever. Now we could do something here with our value, but we don't want to deal with it right now, so we can just call subscribe without anything else. And if we run this code, and the demo gods are good with me today, hopefully. Okay, so I didn't print anything out, but if we jump to data buckets, documents, and there it is, user Michael, first name Michael. So exactly what we wanted to store. Now, what we can do is we can fetch our data back out again, which maybe is a little more interesting. So what we can do is we can say bucket.get with the ID of user. And again, what we get back here is an observable and it returns a JSON document. So what we can do with it is we can say observable, and now we can really subscribe to it. And once we get the return value, we can print it out. We can say system out println JSON document. So if we run this, yay, we get, okay, so there it is, very nice. It has a JSON document of ID Michael, the case value for a document also gets loaded automatically, and the content, which we've stored previously, is right in here. Now, while this is not very fancy, what we can also do is, because I have Java 8 support enabled, we can say replace with Lambda, and we can use Lambda expressions. Now, since this is also replaceable with a method reference directly, you can even do it like this, and this will have exactly the same effect, which is really nice with Java 8. Now, let's do something more interesting, because I want to also show you the little power of observables and give you just a very brief idea. What we can do is we can load the document, we can modify it, and then store it back in one complete asynchronous workflow. So we can say get the key with user Michael. Now, we can use the map function. The map function to go from our JSON document to something else. In our case, we also want to return the JSON document because we're just modifying the content. So we say we do it like this. We say source, and what we are returning, or what we're doing here, is we say source.content, and now we have access to our JSON object. And what we can do is we can say put, I don't know, our source object, and we just modified the content of it. Now the next thing we can do is we can use flat map. It returns an observable, and we can use this because our upsert operation also is asynchronous. So it's like a map operation but for asynchronous stuff. So we can say bucket.upsert and give it, and let's just name this modified because it only contains the last name modified. So what this will do is we load the document once we've loaded it, and again, this is all done asynchronously. Once it's loaded, this method is called, we modify the content, then we pass it on to flatmap, and flatmap then stores the modified document, and everything asynchronously. But it looks synchronous, but it isn't. And now we can say subscribe again, and let's run this. If we jump back here and reload, hey, there we go. So it says user, first name Michael, last name Nitschinger. So we modified our content. We could print out threads in which it's running, but I don't want to do this right now. What IntelliJ does here for me is it makes it smaller, because it always says, hey, we can even replace that with lambdas, and then it really looks nice because, so let's do it like this here. So you can see that basically the complete asynchronous workflow is really, really short and really, really to the point. If you can use Java 8, but also RxJava has language bindings for Scala and JRuby and Groovy. So like Scala and Groovy, they have very nice support for lambdas. So you can use nearly the same pattern there as well. The last thing I want to show you before we do some Node.js stuff, hopefully, I want to show you our brand new Nickel DSL that we shipped with the DP2. I'm not going to run Nickel stuff because we are doing that with the Node.js demo anyway, but I want to show you how the Nickel DSL works. So on the bucket, there is a query method, and we will probably rename this to execute. This is something that we need to figure out yet, but for now let's stick with query. And here we can do a select statement. Nickel only supports select. It's a static import, so we can say select first name from default bucket where, and then we can use an expression. An expression can be done with the X static import to keep it short and lean. For example, where age, and then you can change it. You can say greater than 5, for example. So what this will generate, and let's just copy it out, because you can, if you want to print it, you can just put the println around it, and it will just do the Nickel representation of your string. So let's then do this here. We can run this. So what you can see, it gives us select first name from default where age greater than 5. And this is pretty neat because it is completely type safe with those expressions, and there is much, much more you can do to it. So what I've shown you here is just barely scratches the surface. It supports join, do joins, you can do left join, inner join, outer join. And what I'm really excited about and proud of as well is that this DSL is not only a regular DSL, it's actually implemented that way that it understands the syntax, the BNF notation of the Nickel language. So it knows where you are in the Nickel language process and only presents you those methods which are also available. So for example, you can see that, so we already did the where clause, and it's not, we are not able to add another where clause. We would just ruin our syntax. So also we could do, let's say, for example, a limit of 5 and then an offset. But there is no limit anymore. And as you can see, because we are moving further down the DSL and we supply limit, the only thing, oops, there we go. The only thing that we now can do is the offset, because the offset is really the end of our Nickel query. So this and this allows you to very nicely structure and implement your query with a certain set of confidence that it doesn't contain syntax errors and is also type safe. We are currently implementing also more overloads in the Nickel or in the DSL itself, so that you in some cases do not have to use expressions directly, but for example here you could say greater than 5, which is currently not supported, but we will add those overloads also, and you can be sure that once it's final release, those will be all in place. So I think that's a very quick overview. I mean, there is much more to it. Please check out the blog posts that we have on the page. You can ask questions or reach me through the usual channels. And I think I talked way too much already. I just pass back to Matthew.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michael. That's great. So we don't have any other questions right now. Let me just check my email. No. So I did work out though that for the Q&A to work, we have to enable it before the Hangout starts. So I'm sorry about that. Phil, anything to add before we get into Node.js?
No, I think I'm good. The only thing I was, when I read through what Michael, what you typed up there, Michael, how is connecting to multiple nodes handled now? Because I remember, well, I know that in before you would actually pass a list of nodes and you had to construct it yourself, and now you simply passed an IP and that was it. How does that work now?
Yeah, so currently, if you pass in the host names or IP addresses, it will create those paths automatically under the covers. What we are also looking at and currently working on is what we call the connection string. So in the future, it will be even more versatile how you can bootstrap your initial process. For example, also working with DNS, DNS SRV entries if you want to bootstrap from there and stuff like that, which we're going to add. But currently the process is like this: you pass in a host name, preferably more than one, just 2 or 3. But as with the old SDKs, it doesn't have to be every node. It just has to be 1 or 2 so that we can initially reach the cluster. And once we reach the cluster, we are throwing away your list anyway and taking the list from the cluster. And one thing, I mean, it's now obvious from the flow, but you're passing it only once. So if you open a bucket, another bucket, we don't actually care about this list not at all anymore, because we already have the connections open. So we just fetch through our open connections, through our config connections, we just fetch a new configuration for that bucket and then keep on moving, keep on opening the connections that we want to. And it works backwards as well. So you can open and close buckets the way you want to, and we make sure that the connections and the resources are handled properly.
Cool, nice.
Okay, so thanks for that, Michael. Phil, let's have a look at what's coming up for Node.
Yeah, sure. So I actually don't have any slides, but I'm gonna jump right into code. I hope you can see my screen share now, and I guess so. Okay, so a lot of the stuff in Node is actually gonna work. Well, it's gonna work better than we've seen with Java. So again, I already installed the new SDK here. You can simply get it from NPM actually already. If you just do an NPM install and then you get version 2.0.0. I think we're at DP1 still there. So, and just to make my life a little easier, I also installed the async library, which most people who work with. Okay, so when we much works the same as we've seen with Java. So we need a cluster abstraction here. So we create a new Couchbase cluster. And yeah, what Michael talked about earlier, you can actually do here already. It's you could pass in Couchbase.localhost as a string. This is where what currently works. If you don't pass it in, it actually just takes that one. And again, we're going to open a bucket so we can actually do some useful stuff in here. Open. I use the default bucket now. Okay, so and with that we can actually do similar stuff as we would in Java. So just to demonstrate this real quick, I could do, well, let me just wrap this till everything is done. And Okay, so yeah, like Michael did before, we can now do a bucket upsert, a way more documented API now. So let me insert the foo document, and it's going to be a JSON stringify, and just pass something in, bar bats. And this actually, so I actually want to see something. So let me just pass that in and log out what's actually happening. So if I run this, we actually see that I made a syntax error.
Nice work, Phil.
Yeah, good job, good job. Of course, I don't just have to say that it is just not simply passing async, but actually you have to call a method on it. Amazing, nicely works. So what we see here, okay, so we upserted something and we get back a cas value as well. And like before, if we actually want to, yeah, if we actually would now look in the database, you would actually see this value. I think you will believe me on that one. And to make sure so we don't have to, I'm just gonna do this here as well. Because I want to run it as a script. Yeah, so now I can actually upsert stuff, which basically means insert. If I would use insert now, I would actually get an error and saying like, oh well, this document is already inserted. And with like the method like upsert and insert, like Michael talked about, it's way more document oriented as it has been before. But Michael already showed that we now have as well this nickel query language, and we can use the same stuff in what we can do is we can run a bucket and we can run a query on it. So let's just use something really simple. Select just what we inserted before from default, and I hope I don't have a lot of stuff in there. Better passing a limit. And so I can actually now again log this out, and let's see what we get there. Hopefully we get something. Oh, what we actually get is, well, we don't have any query nodes. So in Nickel, the queries are actually run against, not against like your normal Couchbase instance, but you actually have to, currently you have to start the query engine separately. So what you actually have, what you're actually doing here, you can download this from our webpage. It's currently in dev preview 3, and you just point it to your running Couchbase server, which I have down here. And if I point it there, it will start up, and it will provide me the ability to query against the server. So what I actually can do now, I simply can add some query hosts, and in this case I basically just have one, and by default it will be running on port 8093. And if I run this now again, now I will actually get something back. I will actually see, okay, I did a query and it passed me back this result. In this case, bar bats, the stuff I just inserted before. I think I've flushed the bucket before, so there actually is just one document in there right now. And what's interesting, if I can run now this, we also provide this as part of the package. We also have this, let's say like a shell. I can also point to this query engine, and I can then again do some can do queries against my bucket. So select star from default. Let's see how much I get in there. I actually just got one document, and it will actually pass me back like, okay, there's a result set of certain stuff. I think I installed the beer. You can maybe see something more. Just limited to 2, and you can see, okay, I can now query against different buckets. I can create indexes on top, which will well, currently they are implemented on top of views, but they will be more advanced in the future. And with all this, you can this is like you've seen the query engine still in developer preview 3. It's gonna come, I guess, soonish. Well, it's gonna come sometime in the future, but it will provide you a lot of capabilities as well. So, okay, so in Node.js, we of course can't provide a type-safe API as Michael did in Java, but we can still what we can do now, we can create like kind of a sanitized string at least. So what you could do now is clause, for example, and say, okay, I only want to get the document where bar is something, and you can pass in parameters. Do this, I will again get back my same document. If I pass something else in, which I'm certain is not in there, I will actually get back an empty result set. And this is basically how how queries work against Couchbase using Nickel. But you still have if you're using stuff like absurd, insert, delete, get, you still have all your really fast, like from Couchbase, insanely fast query key value query times. You can also use the view engine, which has been proven to work quite nicely as well. And of course, since JSON actually is a first-class citizen in Couchbase, this works actually really nicely with Node, because I mean, JavaScript object notation using JavaScript, yeah, that's I think quite a nice feature. So that's really just a really quick demo of what you can do in the new SDK. And yeah, so any questions on maybe kind of? Yeah. One
thing I'd like to point out is that Nickel is currently in developer preview, as you said. Just for our listeners, I want to point out that, of course, once this reaches a final release, it will be tightly integrated into the server. So there is nothing else that you need to start up specially. The SDKs will automatically pick up the query engine and all that. So currently you need to start it separately. But in the future, once this is in production grade, it will be integrated tightly into the server.
Yeah, of course. This, like Michael said, like right now it's development. But if you want to try it out, go to the webpage, download it. We also have a really nice tutorial because Nickel can actually, I mean, these were like really simple queries now, but you can actually do a lot more. You can actually work with arrays embedded in the documents, joining stuff together, which you and especially working with arrays inside of documents is really nice, because that's something you can do simply in a normal SQL query. So you would then have to like join multiple tables together and so forth. But in Couchbase, since we actually are a schemaless database and using JSON, you can actually just use JSON arrays straight in your documents and then process them with Nickel as well, which is really nice. Yeah.
Cool, thanks. So we've got a couple of questions coming by email. The first one is from Mark, and the question is, so obviously in the Node.js demo we saw pure Nickel query strings. Is it possible to use just plain Nickel in the Java SDK rather than the DSL, if that's what you want to do?
Yes, it will be possible. Currently, I think, let me quickly check on the API. I think we are already exposing it. Yeah, we are already exposing it in the developer preview, so you can pass in a raw string. What we are going to add in the future is, like with Node.js, that you can do parameterized queries. So you can do wildcards and then pass in your own argument. So yes, the short answer is yes, it is possible, and we will even enhance it more in the future releases.
Cool. And another question here from Anna. It says, or Anna says, there's Couchbase 3.0, and then we're talking about the 2.0 SDKs. Does that mean I can only use the 2.0 SDKs against Couchbase 3.0, or what?
Okay, so that's a good question actually. It depends on the SDKs, but what normally what you can expect is that all of the new SDKs are completely backwards compatible to the current server releases. What will happen, or may will happen, depending on the SDK, is that certain features that will come up in the 3.0 server release and further will only be implemented in the new 2.0 SDKs and not backported to the old ones. But if you go to the new one, you can be sure that it's backwards compatible to the current and slightly older server releases. I think we are currently targeting even going back to 2.0.
Okay, so I mean, you would suggest though that people kind of, once the 2.0 SDKs are production ready, you would suggest that they kind of upgrade and start using those.
I would say at least download it, try it out, and get started, because it's also, and I think they should even do it right now, because right now is the best time to give us feedback. Because now the API, once we are going towards beta release and final, the API will be locked down. So if you try it out now, and we already have very good feedback from users out there, both customers and not customers, just regular users trying it out, I really love the feedback that I get, because that's the only way to validate that we are heading down the right path. So far the feedback has been positive. We made some slight changes already based on feedback. So I would encourage everyone just to try it out. Maybe just do a quick toy project, or just play around with it, and everything that you find, even if you don't know if it's a bug or not, just raise an issue, and we'll figure it out at this point in time.
Where can people find these new SDKs? Where can they try them out?
So your best bet is you go to our blog, and there are release announcements for the developer previews. And because every language has different meanings of downloading the packages, you find everything in the relevant blog post. So for example, with Java, we've set up a custom Maven repository, which you can use to grab the developer preview releases. For Node.js, I think Phil said you can just use npm right away. For PHP, I'm not certain. Maybe it's already in pickle, or you can just download the file. So just go check out the blog posts, and you will find all the information in there.
Great. All right. Well, thanks both. That's been really good. Any final things to say before we wrap up? No? Okay.
Go try the new SDKs.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I'd like to say is we are hiring right now, and if you're interested in Couchbase or NoSQL generally, or you're basically a web or a mobile developer, and you want to do something a little bit different, such as doing Hangouts or going to meetups or going to conferences, then we're looking for developer advocates for Couchbase. Primarily right now in Berlin.
And engineers.
And engineers, yeah. But on the developer advocate side, we're looking for people in Berlin, Tel Aviv, and .NET specialists as well, location flexible, and Seattle, Bay Area, Chicago. And so go to couchbase.com/careers if you're interested in those, or engineering roles as well, which are also very exciting. Thanks, Michael. Okay, well, look, thanks a lot for joining us. We're going to do this regularly, so join us again in probably 2 weeks' time. We'll put up another announcement for when that comes out. So if you have any questions or suggestions or things like you'd like to see, then mail me, Matthew@couchbase.com. If not, thanks a lot for joining us, and see you next time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.